The woman they call Crypto Mom is leaving the SEC in November. She helped build the very rules that could finally set XRP free, and she might be gone before they are even finished. And her exit lands just weeks before the one date every XRP holder is watching, September 15th. One former governor says this shift is already past the point of no return. One former congressman says the window is closing fast. So what does Crypto Mom walking away really mean for XRP? The honest answer is not the one the headlines are screaming. Here is what we are going to do today, and we are going to do it the honest way. Right now, the timeline around XRP is filling up with huge, dramatic dates, and the loudest voices online are telling you that September 15th is the day it all changes forever. So I want to slow this down and give you the full picture. Who is actually leaving and why the timing matters? What a former governor just said about where all of this is heading? What that September date genuinely is and what it is not, and what a former congressman is quietly warning about behind the scenes. No hype, no fear, no political sides, just the clearest map I can hand you so you can make your own decisions with your eyes open. This is Crypto with BHW, and this is the honest version of the September story. Quick note before we dive in, this is not financial advice. Everything you hear today is my personal opinion and research for educational purposes only. Always do your own research. Okay, let us get into it. Let us start with the person at the center of this whole story. Her name is Hester Peirce, and inside the crypto world, she has a nickname. They call her Crypto Mom, and she earned that name honestly. For years, while a lot of regulators treated this entire industry like a crime scene, she was the one voice inside the Securities and Exchange Commission arguing for clear rules instead of endless enforcement. She pushed for a world where builders knew what the law actually was, where a token project did not have to guess whether it was breaking a rule that nobody had ever written down. She joined the SEC back in 2018, and when the agency finally created a dedicated crypto task force at the start of 2025, she was the one chosen to lead it. Think about that. The single most important internal effort to bring clear crypto rules to America, and she was placed right at the head of it. For anyone holding XRP, that task force is not some distant piece of trivia. It is the engine room where the future rules around tokens, custody, trading platforms, and digital assets are actually being shaped. And now, here is the twist. She is leaving. In November, Hester Peirce is stepping away from the SEC to join a university law school. Her term technically expired back in the middle of last year, and she had been staying on in what they call a holdover role. She could have stayed a little longer, into December. She chose November instead. This was not a scandal. It was not a firing. She is simply moving on to the next chapter of her life. But the timing for XRP holders is everything. Because when she walks out that door, the SEC is left with only 2 active commissioners on a body that is designed to hold 5. 2 people carrying the workload of an agency in the middle of the most important crypto rulemaking in its history. And her exit comes right as a new law could shift a huge chunk of crypto oversight away from the SEC and toward a different regulator entirely. So the person who spent years building the framework may not even be in the room when the final version is written. Now sit with that for a second. The most crypto-friendly voice inside the agency is leaving, just weeks before the biggest crypto vote of the year. Does that make things better for XRP, or does it make them more fragile? The answer is not obvious, and it depends heavily on what happens on one specific date. But before we get to that date, there is a former governor who just said something that reframes this entire conversation. In a recent interview, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo sat down to talk about exactly this moment in crypto. And whatever you think of him as a political figure, and I am not here to tell you what to think, the things he said about the technology itself are worth hearing because they line up with what is actually happening on the ground. He said plainly that he believes this technology is going to revolutionize finance. Not might, is going to. And then he said something that really stuck with me. He said we are past the inflection point. In other words, in his view, this is no longer a question of if. The shift has already tipped over the edge. Tokenization, the process of putting real-world assets like stocks and bonds directly onto a blockchain, is happening right now, whether Washington is ready for it or not. And then he pointed at something a lot of Americans do not want to hear. He said this country is behind. Behind Europe, behind Asia, behind a lot of other places that are already moving their financial systems onto these new rails. He described being on-chain as the future, and he listed why. It is faster, it is cheaper, it is more accountable, it is more transparent, and he argued that tokenized securities, stocks and bonds living on a blockchain would be genuinely revolutionary because they would trade 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a single global marketplace. His words. He said it could bring trillions of dollars into the American economy. Now let me be crystal clear, because this is the honest version. That is his opinion, and it is a prediction, not a promise. Nobody can guarantee trillions of dollars or a specific timeline. But here is why it matters so much for XRP specifically. If the future he is describing actually arrives, if the world really does move stocks, bonds, and real-world value onto blockchains, then the networks built for exactly that kind of settlement become the backbone of the new system. And XRP, with a ledger designed from day one for payments, for moving value, and increasingly for tokenization, sits right in the middle of that conversation. It is not the only player, but it is one of the names that comes up again and again when serious people talk about the rails underneath this shift. So you have a former governor saying the transformation is already unstoppable. You have Crypto Mom heading for the exit. And you have one date sitting between the hype and the reality. Let us finally talk about what actually happens on September 15th, because I promise you, it is not what most channels are telling you. All right, this is the part I really need you to hear clearly, because the honest truth here is very different from the headlines. All over the internet right now, people are treating September 15th like it is the finish line, like the confetti is about to drop and XRP gets its freedom that afternoon. And I understand the excitement, but that is not what this vote is. What is scheduled for September 15th is something called a cloture vote on the motion to proceed. Let me translate that out of Washington language and into plain English. It is a procedural first step. It is the Senate voting on whether to even begin formally debating the bill. It is not the final passage of the law. It is the door being opened, not the deal being done. And here is the part that makes it fragile. To clear that step, the bill needs 60 votes in the Senate. 60. That means it cannot pass on one party alone. It needs support from both sides of the aisle, and as of right now, that broader support has not fully come together. There are still real disagreements being worked out over specific pieces of the bill, things like ethics rules, the treatment of decentralized finance, and protections against illicit money. These are not small footnotes. They are the exact sticking points that have slowed the whole thing down. And even if it clears that vote, the road does not end there, because the House of Representatives already passed its own version of this bill back in the summer of 2025. So if the Senate passes a different version, the two chambers have to reconcile the differences and agree on one single final text before it can ever reach the president's desk. That is another step, maybe several more. So let me ask you a simple yes or no question, right here, right now. Knowing all of that, knowing this is a procedural step and not the final signing, does September 15th still feel like the finish line to you? Yes or no? Drop your honest answer in the comments because I genuinely want to see how many of you are seeing this clearly versus getting swept up in the hype. Now, none of this means the date does not matter. It matters enormously. A strong result builds momentum, brings confidence, and tells the world that clear rules for XRP are truly on the way. A weak result does the opposite. But this is a marathon dressed up as a sprint. And there is a former congressman who understands this machine from the inside, and what he is warning about deserves your full attention. The former congressman is Patrick McHenry. For years, he was one of the most senior voices on financial policy in the House, and he was deeply involved in shaping crypto legislation. So when he talks about the mechanics of getting a bill like this across the line, this is a man who has actually done it. And I am going to give you only the neutral, factual parts of what he laid out, because that is where the real value is. His first point is about why a law like this even matters. He explained that right now, there is no law that clearly defines what a digital asset actually is. Think about how strange that is. The whole industry has been operating for years without a basic legal definition at the foundation. And because of that gap, the main regulators do not have full, clean authority to police these markets properly. McHenry described the bill as putting a cop on the beat. A clear set of rules with a clear regulator in charge, so everyone finally knows who is watching and what the standards are. For XRP holders, that clarity is the entire ballgame, because it is the uncertainty itself that has been the heaviest weight on this asset for years. He also pointed out that the bill would add something that surprises a lot of people: ethics rules around government officials owning these kinds of assets, guardrails that simply do not exist in a formal way today. Again, neutral fact, just part of what is inside the bill. But here is his warning, and this is the part that connects straight back to our timeline. McHenry made the point that passing any legislation gets dramatically harder as an election approaches. As the calendar creeps toward the November midterms, the political focus shifts, attention scatters, and the window to actually get complicated things done starts to close. That is not a partisan claim. That is just how the machine works, and he has watched it work for 20 years. And that is why this September window is so tense. It may genuinely be one of the last clean shots to move this forward before the whole political world turns its attention to campaigns. So now you can see the full shape of it. Crypto Mom is leaving in November, the election window is closing around the same time, and the one big vote sits on September 15th, needing support that has not fully arrived. It is a lot. So let me pull it all together and tell you honestly what I think this means for you as an XRP holder. Here is the truth, and it is going to require you to hold two ideas in your head at the very same time. Idea number one: the long-term case for XRP getting real regulatory clarity has never looked more serious. You have a former governor saying the transformation is already unstoppable. You have real legislation further along than it has ever been. You have institutions circling, waiting for exactly this kind of green light. That is genuinely, structurally bullish, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But idea number two, and this is the part the hype channels skip. None of this happens with the flip of a switch on a single Tuesday in September. It is a process, a messy, human, political process, with procedural votes, reconciliation between two chambers, rulemaking that stretches into next year, and key people like Crypto Mom leaving right in the middle of it. Both things are true at once. The destination looks strong, and the road is bumpy, slow, and full of noise. So how should you actually use a date like September 15th? Not as a moment to make an emotional decision. Please hear me on that. When everyone around you is screaming that this is it, that is exactly the moment to stay calm and think clearly. Big anticipated dates in crypto have a way of creating enormous hype on the way in, and sharp disappointment if the result is anything less than perfect. And remember, there is also a major Federal Reserve decision landing around that same window, which means the price of XRP could get pushed around by two powerful forces at once: regulation and interest rates, in the very same stretch of days. Expect volatility. Do not let it shake you. As I record this, XRP is trading around $1.40 after a big weekly run that took it up near $1.70 before pulling back. So the market is already jumpy, already emotional, already reacting to the anticipation. That is your reminder that the price and the actual progress do not always move together. You can get a genuinely good outcome and still see the price dip on the news, simply because the excitement was already priced in. The honest takeaway is this: watch the catalysts, not the countdown clocks. Watch whether that bipartisan support actually comes together. Watch how the reconciliation plays out. Watch who fills the seats at the SEC after Crypto Mom is gone. Those are the real signals. The screaming headlines and the fake urgency are just noise. And if you can train yourself to tell the difference between the two, you will be calmer, sharper, and frankly better positioned than 90% of the people out there reacting to every single tweet. So let us bring it home. Hester Peirce, the one they call Crypto Mom, is stepping away from the SEC in November, right as the biggest crypto vote of the year comes into view. A former governor says the shift to this new financial system is already past the point of no return. A former congressman is warning that the window to get it done is closing fast. And September 15th, the date everyone is circling, is a real and important step. But it is a step, not the finish line. That is the honest version. Not as exciting as the hype, but a whole lot more useful. So keep your head clear. Watch the real signals, not the loudest ones, and keep showing up, because the people who actually understand how this works are the ones who never get played by the noise. This has been Crypto with BHW. We're early, the foundation is being poured, and I'll see you in the very next one.